Halo, halo, dobry wieczór
Hello.
Państwu. Czy
Good
nas
evening, ladies and
słychać?
gentlemen. Can you hear
Czy
us?
słychać nas w Polsce, czy
Can you
słychać
hear
nas w
us in
Szwecji?
Poland?
Chyba
Can you
już
hear
nas
us in
słychać.
Sweden? I believe you can.
Dobry wieczór
Good
jeszcze
evening,
raz.
yet again.
Bardzo miło mi powitać wszystkich Państwa
I welcome
tutaj
you very
i
warm
tam, po
here
drugiej stronie
and
kamery,
there, on the
na
other side of the
kolejnym,
camera
na kolejnej
lens,
odsłonie Baltic
to yet
Festival, na tej
again
odsłonie
another
literackiej,
event to
ponieważ
Baltic Sea
moimi
Festival.
gośćmi
This
tu
time
na
we're in
tej
literature
niezwykłej
as my
i
guests
miejscu
at
zaaranżowanej
this
scenie są
fantastic
Jacek,
place
Dehnel
and
i
on
Piotr
this
Tarczyński.
stage are Jacek, Dehnel and Piotr Tarczyński. Good evening. Good evening.
I pewnie się tylko, że istnieje
Allow me
może
just
jeszcze
to make
możliwość
sure
podania nam jednego
that
mikrofonu. Na
we
pewno
could have
będzie
yet another
nam dzięki temu łatwiej
microphone,
rozmawiać,
which is
bo
going to
podawanie
facilitate
sobie
conversation,
mikrofonu zawsze trochę utrudnia sprawę,
since
więc
giving
tylko
up the
rzucam tę
microphone
luźną uwagę w
could be a bit of an issue.
przestrzeń
So
kościoła.
just a loose remark
Pozwolę sobie
that
Państwu,
I throw in the
tym, którzy
space of
być
this
może,
church.
zwłaszcza tym,
I
którzy
allow
oglądają nas w
myself
Szwecji,
to
nie
explain,
znają
especially to
dokładnie,
those who watch us from
twórczości
Sweden,
naszych
who are not
dzisiejszych gości.
familiar
Pozwolę sobie powiedzieć,
with
że
the works
Jacek
of our
Dehnel jest
guests.
znakomitym
I'll remind you that
polskim
Jacek Dehnel is
pisarzem,
an
poetą,
eminent
tłumaczem.
Polish writer, poet, and translator. Piotr Tarczyński is a historian, American studies expert and also a translator and author of a fantastic American podcast. But tonight you've joined us as one. Can you tell us why? And that's why we share a single microphone. Correct. Please tell us in what capacity you've joined us tonight. Well, tonight we're a double-headed queen of Polish crime literature, i.e. Maryla Szymiczkowa. Yeah. We've got a joint literary project, which is a cycle of crime novels about Professor Szczupaczyńska, thought up mostly by Piotr, and we've got a joint pseudonym of Maryla Szymiczkowa.
Potwierdzasz to?
Zgadzam się.
Do you corroborate? Yes, I agree. Yes.
Możemy przechodzić dalej.
Yeah, quite an agreement with each other, so let's move on, shall we?
Autorka, piszecie kryminały retro.
As an
My
author,
tutaj mamy
you write
rozmawiać o
retro
bardzo
crime
poważnych
novels,
kwestiach, o
and we are to
granicach,
talk
o
about very serious matters like
przekraczaniu, więc ja wam
borders,
zadam takie pytanie na początek. Czy
transgressing
uważacie, że
borders.
retro
So allow me
kryminał
to first
ma w sobie
ask
jakiś
you
potencjał
if this
wywrotowości?
retro crime novels bears this potential of being irreverent. Yes, crime novels are such type of literary genre which allows you for a lot of variety and requires those, because if you consider crime novels, they are quite boring as a form. So someone kills or steals stuff. We've got this eminent detective, be them male or female, who bring events into the limelight, and after a few chapters we find out who killed or stole, and they are brought to justice. So this is the framework of a crime story, and not much variety is available, really. So we need to fill in the framework with something, be it with violence, perversion, or other tasty items, or we could just actually imbue a crime story with some other tropes. And we just thought up Zofia Szczupaczyńska and Maryla Szymiczkowa as such characters who have this subversive potential and this emancipatory capacity, and it's no accident they are females, one of them real, one false. Well, actually, they are both entirely fictitious. Well, it's fantastic that you just actually find out that one of them doesn't exist, actually both of them. So, yeah, actually, it's a female in the male world. Yes, because Professor Szczupaczyńska, who solves crime stories at the turn of the 19th and 20th century in Krakow, is not a character who could have been a detective at that time, because her role would be to be a housewife to her husband. And even if they're incredibly intelligent, and she is, it doesn't matter. It's just like a composer we've heard about a moment ago. It doesn't matter if they are good or bad at what they do. It's not her role to solve crime stories. So that's why our character is a subversive one. She transgresses the borders, be them gender borders, and she learns something about the world, and the readers alongside with her. Yeah, also about the house, very urbane house, which is this town. quite upset. What does it lead to? Well, she's exposed to a lot of trial, actually. She actually is convinced that she's in the best of the worlds in this Austria-Hungary, Franz Josef Empire. And then she finds out that not everyone enjoys their lives. It's not nice to the females, to the Jewish, to the poor, to peasants. And then she experiences ever more hardship. And now we've only got to the fourth novel, but I believe she's going to be trialed ever more. Can I just explain what it leads to? First of all, it leads to World War I, actually, and then to World War II. So what we are describing, those social tensions that explode. The third volume starts with the murder of Empress Visisi, and this actual social unrest explodes 2 decades on with World War I. So when yet another murder of a person from that family is going to lead to the outbreak of World War I, and when we consider that, we just need to realize that the world does change, that Sofia is a conservative person also because of the social class she emancipates from. She just learns the 20th century, the era which is yet to come. She just senses those tremors which are going to get ever harder and are going to see an entire reworking of this post-Vienna Congress world. And we just show it to the readers that it's not always like in crime novels that people 100, 200, 300 years ago, so just like us, just dressed a bit different and with no electricity around, because this is the popular belief when I read retro crime novels, that nothing happens, everyone addresses themselves the same language, there are no forms, and we just depict that the people from a century ago are very different people. They think about matters we wouldn't anymore, and the simplest everyday activities are different, and interpersonal relationships. And this is the most important part of a retro crime novel, that our forefathers, they just presented a very different way of thinking of the world. It doesn't mean they weren't subject to the same passions and also avarice. But we don't think like others, that it's just about different dress codes, they had different meals, they couldn't actually load up a dishwasher, nor could they cook things very easily because they needed a butler for it, or the things would spoil because there were no fridges, and if there were, they looked different, and that passing on a message was much harder because communications were limited, and what revolution was heralded by the telephone, because I believe our character receives the first telephone at the end of the first volume. And now when we consider the crime films of the 1970s, translating those into today's reality would be really difficult, because police drama or any sensational tropes could be solved within a single text message. But such a story can't be actually localized to this place and time one-to-one. And when we consider the 19th century, those disparities are much larger. I wanted to ask you if this young Poland that you have exploited so extensively in your writing, would that be the period that you were fascinated by and you decided to get down to work, or was it that you were absorbed by it when you started work? The young Poland was just an element of the entire fictional world, because this is just one such current with some eminent names to it, but actually in the Krakow of the time, much more is afoot. There are people of different generations, those old January uprising veterans, some strange countesses. There's the Austro-Hungary secret intelligence agents. So we tried to use a variety of characters from that era, and also artists like Wyspiański or Przybyszewski, but also persons like Stanisław Teofil Kurkiewicz, the creator of sexuology, who displayed slight mania
wszystkie rzeczy dotyczące seksu nazwać po
just
polsku.
to name anything sexual to term in Polish. So
Takie postaci, one niekoniecznie są aż tak znane
such
jak te
characters
wielkie
are not that
nazwiska,
famous
ale
as
nadają
those
tego
big
kolorytu.
names we've brought up, but they add some color.
Znane, o których
And speaking of those famous persons like Przemyszewski, I believe readers realize that
może nie naśmiewamy, ale
we
traktujemy je jednak z pewnym
don't
przymrużeniem oka.
actually jeer those characters, but we take them with a wink of the eye, and Przybyszewski speak in his very own word. We just provide extensive quotes from his writings, and that it sounds idiotic, it's not our fault. Blame the author.
Ostatni tom,
The last
Wesele,
volume,
i to jest w sumie
the wedding reception,
taki prawie zamach na świętość,
and
to czego
actually
dokonujecie.
it's a
To
swing
wesele było skandalem
at
pod każdym
a whole
względem,
piece of
prawda?
writing in
To było
Polish
skandalem
literature.
jako
The
wydarzenie
wedding reception was
historyczne,
a
ale
scandal
później
as a
jako
historical
przedstawienie również
event,
było skandalem.
but it was also
Co
a
to
scandal
dla was
as the
znaczy
first performance
dzisiaj
in theatre.
Skandal.
So what does it mean to you nowadays? Scandal.
No, w tym społeczeństwie to naprawdę
I
skandalizować
think
się
in
można
this
naprawdę
society
wszystko.
you can get scandalized by just about everything.
Żyjącym skandalem, wiesz,
It's
żyjącym skandalem.
we
bo
both of us are
jesteśmy
a living
małżeństwem,
scandal.
więc,
We are
to
married
jest skandal dla wielu ludzi.
and to each other, and that's a scandal to a vast majority of people.
Polska jako rekonstrukcja
But the wedding reception can say Poland is as a reconstruction of Krakow, all the entire contemporary Poland as a reconstruction of Krakow of the turn of the 19th and 20th century, whereby all the sacred things were really treated with utmost respect, but it didn't actually stand in the way of hypocrisy which permeated the society. I struggle with the category of scandal. I believe it's a bit archaic way of understanding this matter.
jakieś oburzenie czy coś.
Yeah, there could
To
be
jest, to nie w
outrage,
internecie, jak wiemy, to jest... ale to nie jest
Uznajmy,
skandal.
że-
Skandal ma jakiś taki
kerfuffle
charakter, że
online. So
za tym
I
stoi
think
jakieś
the
przekonanie, że
scandal
coś
is
został złamany,
informed by the
jakiś
fact that
obyczaj, albo...
a
Przekroczona
code
jakaś
has
granica,
been
tak?
transgressed, a border has been
Tak,
transgressed,
ale
as if.
ja myślę, że to jednak jest dość archaiczne. Ja nie wiem,
I believe
przypomnij mi
it's
jakiś
quite
skandal.
archaic. Just
Ostatni
please
skandal.
remind me of the latest
Myślę, że
scandal
z czystym sumieniem mogłabyś tak nazwać.
that you could actually term something as scandal. Yeah, I've actually surprised myself with this question. Makes no sense, does it? Perhaps you, the audience, could support us if you could bring up a racy scandal of any latest days. Anything to Paweł Cookies. But those are political scandals. So they are governed by different matters because you have the entire political rhetoric to it. But I believe a scandal per se must be there must be something about social norms, and it's very much about a class society, and we live in a society which is not a post-class society, but it's not as important as it was 100 years ago, so the category of scandal has lost its actual meaning. So actually intermarriage into the lower classes, and people do get married irrespectively of their social background. That's all that someone has actually married a divorcee. It's almost impossible actually to avoid nowadays. Well, I have managed to do that, but yeah, so with scandals, I think it's a bit of a cliche and passe, but I think that's why we draw so much pleasure from this retro crime novel thing, that we could get excited with those scandals that a countess eloped with a lover.
Zostańmy jeszcze przez chwilę przy tym
So
przekraczaniu granic.
let's stick
Chciałam was
to the
zapytać,
transgression of borders.
czy my umiemy je dzisiaj przekraczać
I just wanted to ask if we can transgress
nie
those
zawężać
in
sobie pola,
such
tylko
a
je
way
rozszerzać. To znaczy, że
to
przy
actually
przekroczeniu
extend our
granicy
horizons as opposed to make them,
sztuce, no też może w relacjach międzyludzkich,
well,
czy ono dzisiaj
dinner.
jeszcze potrafi służyć
So in
budowaniu
art or
wspólnoty,
interpersonal relations, can it
tylko
serve
i wyłącznie
building a community,
jej burzeniu?
or is it just about bringing it down? It depends what we transgress in what dimensions. Just like doors, we either walk in or walk out. Those are quite opposite directions. So there are many a way of transgressing oneself in the society, which could be individual and communal in nature, giving up on something to the advantage of somebody else, I think, and also just refusing those atavistic urges to amass stuff. And this altruistic transgression that we hear a lot about, also it's silly, that you shouldn't do that, you must have been too good. So sometimes it scandalizes people that someone is just too good. Of course, it's communal, giving up on your own advantage to the benefits of another or a community. But you could also transgress a border the other way, so you could try to hoard up what is common to your own advantage. And I believe it's the essence of writing to transgress borders, which is all about impersonating. We impersonate not only Zofia Szczepaczyńska, who's a female and she lived 150 years ago or 120 years ago, but also we impersonate all the other characters. Of course, we add some flavor to them, because Zofia is there's a bit of me and Piotr to me, and her husband Ignacy have got a part of me and Piotr, so they also share our peculiarities symmetrically. But the development of a character, be them female or male, means transgressing the limitations of yourself, giving up your own decisions and motivations, and trying to get the feel of somebody else's. That's the basic of writing and acting work. Yeah, so just trying to... We take what we know, i.e. ourselves, and our own peculiarities, like Zofia and Ignacy, and all the other characters. We're not going to reveal too much, but a lot of characters from the volumes of this series bear some features we know from our own lives. We'll leave you to actually fill this void. Yeah, a lot of stuff is taken from our own experience. I understand. You set your writing very much in historical frameworks. We see a lot of research, and you must draw a lot of pleasure and enjoyment from this abundance of detail, this richness of detail. That's how you need to do it. So if you work, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing it right. And it's even true about myself, because I'm a historian by trade, and I don't like writing. So for me, writing is transgressing a limitation, because I don't like it, and I know I have to do it, and I do it. But it's nothing pleasant. But research is very nice, but I wouldn't say it's a mission, because that would be a bit too ambitious, but it's just essential reliability. If we write a crime novel set 120 years ago, we need to put our shoulders to the wheel, and we need to deliver quality work, as opposed to just dress up contemporary world. And also, let's add that some people in Krakow would actually point it out to us if we made a scandalous mistake of confusing house numbers or describing a house that didn't actually exist there, or that the tree was on the left or on the right. It's all serious business, and it could be scandalizing in Krakow, and that's why I think we should do our best and do our research properly. And I also believe those are fabulous stories. I'm not speaking of the main plot, because when you read through the press of the time, the correspondence, the memoirs, it's just beautiful stories just come to the fore by themselves. So a gentleman who just dreamt of a treasure being buried underneath a church bench, and he would go there and try and dig it up. About a lady from the underworld who had this pseudonym or nickname, Zośka Tomato, because of her red face. also a traffic jam when there was the opening of the theatre, because everyone wanted to come in a cart, and well, they could walk 100 meters, but then they didn't want to, and that's why there was a jam. And why a Hungarian MP fell out of a window because he lost a bottle of strong plum vodka and he just followed suit. And also about raisins in cheesecake, we can say. So not everyone likes such raisins, but we do, and we just try to ensure they make it to the cake. And I think we get such tasty details just spoken to our ears by the history. I don't think we could sometimes think up such matters. Yes, I invented this traffic jam on the way to the theatre, and only later on it turned out I was right, and it actually had been such traffic jam. We just read about it in the papers. It was supposed to be a bit ironic about all those who go by car, but it turns out to be the case in Krakow 120 years ago. So actually, we wouldn't like to miss out on such leaders because it's great support for writers. Krakow, which is so fantastically archived, it's got so many materials and documents which we wouldn't have about Warsaw. And that's why this research is not so hard. It's not that I do some sort of Sisyphean work, and it just exists, and you just need to tap into the potential of resources, and it's not so much work, you just need to try and do it. Do you browse the period press? Yes, I read a lot of it, and mostly it's just silly stuff, and I try to have some cutouts, and have some screenshots, and I've got it all folderized, and later on I just try it. For example, the Sultan of Turkey, ill with bowel syndrome. So, such actual headlines could be useful. You never know whenever someone finds a taste for such a raisin.
We are talking here about history. We are talking about looking into it. It must have been you, Jacek, who said some time ago that Poles are not interested in history, but they're excited about it. Well, I quoted it, actually. I took it from an internet commentary, but I liked it. What do you understand by it? Well, that we, as a society, very often have this need. Which also stems from the history of Poland, which was dramatic, the history of us being devoid of statehood. We have this need for the history to bring comfort to us, to tell us how we used to be. This we, of course, is disputable. To what an extent somebody from the 15th century is actually us. But it is us who turned victorious in the Battle of Grunwald. It is us who invented something and so on. But it is my impression, and it is not only my impression, but also that shared by many historians, that we are far less interested in what things actually were. When certain threads of history do not present us favorably, we'll lose interest in those bits. They're not interesting to us. In this sense, our approach is different. We are more interested in what Krakow was actually like back in the 19th century. Of course, there is not a single truth about history. It's a certain vision of what it was, but we believe it is important to pay attention to what the facts were. And it is even more exciting to approach it, allowing also those darker bits of history. So Wyspiański will die of less pleasant disease, or less favorable ones than the one that people would like to read about. So from the very beginning, we put great emphasis on the history of those social groups or individuals that are usually excluded. So we've got peasants uprising in the first book. Then we've got human trafficking. We've got the issue of women education. That back then was an important topic that men discussed about whether women should or not be allowed to be educated. And I think that also in the first and in the second part of the series, our protagonist learns about the fate of the Jewish and other poorer parts of the society, which actually constituted a majority. In the first part, our protagonist lives in her world that is rather enclosed, governed by our good emperor. And in the other part that is called Torn Curtain, she actually looks through this curtain and learns that the world is not so pleasant out there. And well, the readers would like to peep out the curtain. Well, it depends. I remember that there was a part in which we actually criticized the January uprising. Well, Zofia, of course, our protagonist, criticized it. She and we, through her, expressed a view that for some, the January uprising was just a riot in Russia. And one of the readers at one of the meetings was outraged, and she started telling us about her family, her aunties in the 19th century, and she said, "You might not remember." So, as you know, yes, it can still raise controversy. And as Americans say, the January uprising here in this case is something that you would approach saying too soon. So it's not something you're free to discuss yet. But I believe that, at least for some of our readers, these things are new. Not that they have not heard about the peasants' uprising or about the Young Poland, but they learn a lot, and, well, we do as well. For example, that the Young Poland is perceived as a monolith, as a period that continues over 15 or 20 years, with a lot of turmoil in Krakow. Then you've got Przybyszewski, Wyspiański, the wedding reception, you've got the Green Balloon Cabaret, you've got Bożeleński and other creators, writers of the Polish literature. What we do is grabbing a certain character for it not to disappear. Przybyszewski is just a single year, and then he goes away, ceases to be so important. And actually, he never sat there watching the performances in Yama Michalikova or the Green Balloon. It is not where he got drunk drinking absinthe, but in Poland that very quickly was closed as it went bankrupt. So it is only when you take a closer look at all these things that proved to be rather amorphous, a process that is rather lively and changing over time. It is my impression that this is a problem about teaching history in Poland, that we talk about historical periods, and again, I will use a term that I dislike, that you go through them, as you go through literature, obligatory reading. I was thinking, well, you process that to get what? So we are taught to think in blocks. Block 1, ancient times. ABC happened. Block 2, early medieval ages. Cieszyn something, blah, blah, blah. And probably this is where the problem lies, and this is what causes resistance against having this research-based look on history, detailed look. Well, I think that some people dislike history. They say, well, I'm bored with it, it's not interesting. Yeah, I've actually met a Pole who was bored with history. Yes, they sometimes consider it as a parade of names, dates, and battles. There are those who are fascinated by it. I can understand why someone can find it boring, but history can be simply a story of people, a story of social strata, a history of changes. And this is the way we try to approach history. And again, what we write is crime stories. We are not historians. per se. There are historians who do that far better and in a more interesting way than we do when they do it in books on history. But we try to find a niche. We try to attract those who are not interested in history to books on history of the new type that are interesting for them enough. So they might want to grab a crime story and they might get a bit of history that might actually change their perception of the past. And that's good. School education requires certain simplifications. So let them process it first and then learn that it was actually pretty much different or somewhat different. Learning any kind of domain is actually a continuous process. We keep on learning, so why not? Let's lay foundations first and then keep building on them. I was afraid that you'd say that you keep on learning throughout your life, but well, you haven't said that. So we can move on. I want to ask you whether you have this feeling that your role as public persons, as creators, or even your responsibility, much as I dislike the word, is an attempt at inviting others to enter into dialogue, to reaching out a hand to the other side and saying, let's talk, brother, let's talk, sister. Is it important for you to talk, to breach certain borders that otherwise are not breached? Well, let's leave Maryla Szymiczkowa aside because well, our views here differ, so I will tell you about my views, and then Jacek will tell you something else. Jacek believes that you should enter into a dialogue and try to persuade somebody into your beliefs. I used to be on the same side, but now I think that maybe stepping back is healthier to ourselves, and I don't believe that it actually gives something, that it brings any fruit. Jacek believes that it is still worthwhile, but I think that we lose more than gain trying to persuade somebody into something, particularly when you do that in the internet. So any good deed will be punished, and you will not benefit. This is something that I've learned recently, and that is why I decided on an inward migration. But Jacek can give you his arguments. Well, when we write books, together or apart, we do reach for others, but it is not actually going to the other side. When somebody reads, it means that he or she is already partly on our side. The act of reading the text that we produced itself, the text that we conceived and created, put together, equals readiness to enter into a dialogue, a readiness to meet within the space of the text. We can agree or disagree. A reader can say, well, that's actually rubbish, or they might agree with us. It can be a mission, but it's not going to the other side, okay? It's not crossing the boundary. It's actually creating a space to talk. But this going to the other side, well, when we talk about publishing in journals, newspapers, or in portals, or Facebook, this is something different. It's very time-consuming. It burdens you emotionally. And I think that there is some sense to it, but it's very hard. It's a very hard work. I think that entering into a dialogue in the internet or over Facebook doesn't make sense, in as much as I'm not really able to persuade the person to accept our views. Because if somebody has a completely different worldview, then they differ, we differ at all levels, and you cannot agree as to the facts. Because this is this level of having alternative facts, and there is nothing you can do about it. There is lack of common space here. So we agree that there are certain facts, and we can approach them together. But all too often, the internet discussions affects other people, and this is where I see the greatest importance. In other words, the readers of those discussions can receive sets of arguments, sets of data that are acquirable from the internet, from the books. And in this sense, it is educational. I do that often because I get to know a lot of things. I educate myself this way. But it is time-consuming, and Piotr is often right when he says I overdo it. Well, now I'm going to ask a question. Well, isn't it the case that it's not the dialogue that matters, but the monologue? Because actually what you could do is present all these facts in a monologue rather than a dialogue, if the person that you enter into dialogue with is not to accept it. Well, since Plato times, we know that it's been working. If it's written in the form of a dialogue, this is a rhetorical way of persuading people into accepting your views that is far more effective than monologue. There is this other character that I might not like. I may even dislike them very much, but I need them. Just like in American stand-up, you need the straight man, somebody you bounce back from, and owing to the fact this ball is moving. But since Plato's time, we know that if you are the one telling everybody else what the reality is, you should leave Athens before it will be too late. Well, sometimes simply I'm afraid, and I really am concerned about psychological and mental and physical safety. I have nothing against writing, text publishing in journals and so on. I struggle with the dialogue. Well, tell people what you have to tell, but do you really need to discuss it? Well, okay, I accept this argument, but I beg to differ. But authentically, I am sometimes concerned about the physical security, safety. Jacek is a person who is recognizable. I'm not, or rarely am, but Jacek is. He also wears a characteristic outfit, and I'm simply afraid that he will be punched on the face one day, and I'd rather this not happened. Aren't you afraid? Well, I am, so that somewhat. That is why we left. But the fear is not strong enough for us to stop doing what we've been doing. Well, I don't find myself to be the person who stands the greatest risk. Well, I am Mr. Writer. I am known, and as he, I'm holding the mic so I can speak. And I can speak on behalf of those who have no say. And it is them who stand the greater risk. So in a way, this is taking over this responsibility, which I think constitutes a part of writer's work. I don't think that this is obligatory. I think that any writer or female writer decide for themselves in this respect. So the basic obligation of writers is to create a good text, a good literary text. But we are all citizens and female citizens, and some of us at least believe that they also have this additional duty, that is their citizens' duty of using their position and benefiting from the fact that we all work with texts, which makes it easy for us to use words. It is easier for us to put up arguments. It is far easier than it is to those who have not been educated in rhetoric. And of course, there are those who stand greater risks than I do. So I consider it to be my ethical obligation to get involved. As you can see, there is a dispute here within Maryla Szymiczkowa's household. This is the torn curtain. Been torn up in many places. We're talking here within a festival that exceeds borders. You are being watched in Sweden. Events are taking place in a few locations at the same time. So I thought that I would ask you a question. Well, yes, we are actually about to run out of time, so I'm going to ask you the following question. In the context of such transnational
Jak wy w ogóle
Trans-border
widzicie, to jest
meetings.
trudne pytanie i długa będzie wasza odpowiedź, ale
Trans-border
musicie się zmieścić
meetings.
w 4 minutach,
Well,
więc jakoś się podzielcie
your
tym
answer
czasem.
should take no longer
Będzie
than
w
4
prawdziwym radiu,
minutes, so it's
szybko.
going to be like on a
Jak wy
real
widzicie
radio show.
Europę?
How do you
Jak wy
perceive
widzicie jej
Europe? How
przyszłość?
do you see
Czy wy
the
w ogóle-
future of
czy
Europe?
takie poruszanie się pomiędzy będzie miało jeszcze za jakąś chwilę
Will
sens?
moving in between make sense, or will it lose its sense? Well, I'm very happy that we live in the times in which Poland belongs to the European Union and to the Schengen zone, and I've benefited from it in many ways as a writer, not only as a human, as a traveler, as a person looking for experiences. But the pandemic restrictions constitute just a minor part of my life. We will see how things go, whether new problems will arise because the borders might be closed as a result of many different events or situations, pandemic, wars, catastrophes. So perhaps we are about to experience some longer pauses like the one we've been experiencing. But I think that open borders constitute one of the greatest advantages of the European Union. And this is something I've missed a lot when the borders were not open. I've got a minute to say how I see. No, 2 minutes. Well, generally, I'm pessimistic. Jacek is more optimistic. I see everything in dark colors, so it is not a good end to a conversation when I see everything dark, and I'm convinced it's not good and it's going to be even worse. Because if, for example, climatic changes, we are not going to be able to fly that much, to travel far, and we will have to stick to our part of the world. And it does have some advantages that we will discover one day, but I'm worried about that. And I'm not optimistic at all. I'm not going to tell you anything good. No, this is not the way to finish this conversation.
Pozdrawiamy Szwecję, kochamy was
We
ogólnie.
would like to greet Sweden. We love you.
Jest jak jest. Tak, jest jak jest, trzeba tak to zostawić. Mówią
It is the way it
państwo,
is. You need to leave it simply. This is what we hear
jak ma być.
from the
Tak.
audience.
Trzeba jednak trochę
Things are what they are.
życia,
Well,
żebyśmy
I think that we
mogli
should adapt, or maybe to change our lifestyle. And if we want to keep on living, we shouldn't really adopt the way of thinking along the lines of accepting the things as they are. We should change
To też
our
prawda.
ways to make
Pantarej,
things better.
chociaż morze
Panta
chyba nie
Ray,
płynie z
somebody
tego, co,
says.
też,
But even though the sea
pozytywny akcent na koniec,
does not
możemy się
float
żegnać
or
z
is
tym
rather
w
wavy.
smutno.
Anyhow, we
Powiedzcie mi, czy
cannot
naprawdę, bo dostałam
leave
tylko
it
półtorej
like
minuty.
that on
Nie,
this
już nie
dark
zostało.
note.
Nie,
I
no,
don't
po
even
prostu
have
powiedzcie,
time
kiedy
to
nowa
finish. So
książka
let
i
us
kończymy.
simply end by announcing your new book. Well, we can tell you that the 2 books were published in English. There goes Missing and Carolina and the Torn Curtain. Those are the 2 first parts. They have been published in English, so we hope that the new ones will be published both in Polish and English. And next time we will talk about how the English and the Americans read Szymiczkowa and what they understand from it. Thank you very much for this meeting. We'd like to thank our audiences in Sweden. We'd like to thank you and invite you to further events within the festival. Thank you very much. Thank you.